with bonds of commerce and democracy. Oppressed peoples and nations won liberation. An international community established institutions and treaties that worked to avoid war and aspired to restrict and roll back and ultimately eliminate the existence of nuclear weapons. Still, every act of aggression between nations, every act of terror and corruption and cruelty and oppression that we see around the world shows our work is never done. We may not be able to eliminate man's capacity to do evil. So nations and the alliances that we formed must possess the means to defend ourselves. But among those nations like my own that hold nuclear stockpiles, we must have the courage to escape the logic of fear and pursue a world without them. We may not realize this goal in my lifetime, but persistent effort can roll back the possibility of catastrophe. We can chart a course that leads to the destruction of these stockpiles. We can stop the spread to new nations and secure deadly materials from fanatics. And yet that is not enough. For we see around the world today how even the crudest rifles and barrel bombs can serve up violence on a terrible scale. We must change our mindset about war itself to prevent conflict through diplomacy and strive to end conflicts after they've begun. To see our growing interdependence as a cause for peaceful cooperation and not violent competition. To define our nations not by our capacity to destroy, but by what we build. And perhaps above all, we must reimagine our connection to one another as members of one human race. For this too is what makes our species unique. We're not bound by genetic code to repeat the mistakes of the past. We can learn. We can choose. We can tell our children a different story, one that describes a common humanity, one that makes war less likely and cruelty less easily accepted. We see these stories in the Hibakusya, the woman who forgave a pilot who flew the plane that dropped the atomic bomb because she recognized that what she really hated was war itself. The man who sought out families of Americans killed here because he believed their loss was equal to his own. My own nation's story began with simple words. All men are created equal and endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights, including life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Realizing that ideal has never been easy, even within our own borders, even among our own citizens. But staying true to that story is worth the effort. It is an ideal to be strived for, an ideal that extends across continents and across oceans. The irreducible worth of every person, the insistence that every life is precious, the radical and necessary notion that we are part of a single human family.
Incredible tragedy of what happened, but you heard him say, look at war itself, that humans shouldn't be doing this. He also talked about the obvious, moving beyond nuclear weapons, but he said that crude weapons, we see barrel bombs, cause the same kind of terror and wreak the same kinds of destruction. So individually, I don't know that there's a human alive that wouldn't agree with his words, but the reality of the world right now is much, much different. And much has been said about denuclearization, how much progress this administration has been able to make on that. Obviously, the Iran nuclear deal is kind of the crowning moment of that effort, but many have said that, right now, the world is really farther away from that goal than it was when President Obama first took office. The threat of North Korea right now is very real. It's especially real to the people of Japan. So with that overarching threat and the uncertainty that surrounds some of these hot spots in the world, I know, it was clear that the president wanted to have his words impact the reality of the world right now, to kind of drive those points home in light of what is going on. Will this spur nations to additional action in denuclearization? That really remains to be seen. I mean, things don't happen after an address like this. And when you look at, for example, the U.S. and Russia, they have reduced their nuclear stockpiles, but the U.S. would like to see that go much, much further. It's stalled, though. Russia doesn't want to participate in that. So obviously, reaching the goals that President Obama laid out in this speech, these are difficult long-term. He even said, he doesn't think that this is going to happen in his lifetime, but why not, I guess you could say, take the moment, take the impact of being in a place like this. This is the one time in human history where this has
Michelle,
happened.
I'm going to stop you for just a moment.
So,
we're watching some pictures right now that really are quite touching. I just want to reference, and then we can continue the conversation. Here's President Obama now meeting with presumably some of those survivors of that Hiroshima bomb blast, and we've seen him now even give hugs to a couple of these men. We've seen smiles. We've also seen him listening intently and also now responding through a translator. Just a touching moment. Again, another historic moment here. Go ahead, Michelle.
I think another reason this is a good time is because, given where we are right now, 71 years past this happening, these survivors are harder to come by now. There aren't that many of them still alive. So it was touching, too, to see them arrive here today. Kind of everyone turned around and, tried to sort of at least get a glimpse of them and kind of, offer respect in whatever way you could. Some of them brought in wheelchairs. And you kind of, they are the living reminders of what happened here. It's hard enough to stand here and look at the city. You see construction cranes and modern buildings. It's really a vibrant place. But to see a person walk in who survived that nuclear bomb blast, that really drives it home that, the human toll of this is what the White House wanted to get across and what the president said, the toll of innocent people. Because remember, most of the people who died in both of these blasts were not soldiers, they were civilians.
And President Obama did tell some of those survivor stories during his speech there today. Let's go ahead, Michelle. Let's bring in, while you stay right there, let's bring in CNN political analyst and Washington Post columnist Josh Rogan. Josh, we're bringing you in because you lived and you reported in Japan for several years. What are you thinking as you watch this historic moment?
Well, thanks. Yes, I've been to the blast of the atomic bomb on August 6, 1945. And that structure was preserved and not repaired as a constant reminder of the sheer devastation of that fateful day. And then also you see in the background what's called the Children's Peace Memorial. And that is a monument to the children that not only died on that day, but died for several years later as a result of the lingering effects of the radioactive material that was left over in the wake of the bomb. Thousands of children who weren't even alive in 1945 developed terrible diseases and died years later. So the effects of the atomic bomb in Hiroshima were not just on that day, but actually people suffered for years later. You know, as I watch these remarks and these interactions, I'm just struck both emotionally and sort of intellectually by the difference in Japan from then until now. I mean, just think only 70 years ago, which is not